Are you ready? Wait. I'll be done in a bit. My parents were having such a conversation in the living room. I was born deaf. I found out about this fact when I was very young. However, I started learning at a school for the deaf and mastered lip reading. This is a technique of interpreting what someone is saying by watching the movements of their lips. Good morning, Cheryl. I nodded. Usually, conversations with my parents were conducted using a speech recognition app on a smartphone. This was because it was the most effective method. By the way, I kept it a secret from my family that I could read lips. Today we are going out somewhere as a family. Cheryl, hurry up and get changed. Got it. I was thrilled. Normally, I hardly ever go out except for school. To avoid dangers, I was not allowed to go out alone. After getting dressed, I asked my mother, "Where are we going?" That's a surprise for when we get there. While getting into the car, I became even more excited. I wonder when was the last time I felt this excited. 30 minutes later, I noticed an unbelievable conversation between my parents. She's so creepy. Hey, that's terrible. She's our child, you know. My mother was sitting in the passenger seat, and I was in the back, so I couldn't read her lips. Instead, I used a translation app to understand their conversation. The problem is, it's hard to guess what she's thinking. Well, she can't hear, so it can't be helped. My mother looked back at me. She's probably thinking we're taking her to a fun place. Hearing that conversation, my heart started to pound thinking about where we were going, but it wasn't in a positive way. My heart was filled with anxiety, and everything around me seemed blurry. Even before I could fully assert myself, I had felt cold stares from my parents. Even as a child, I felt like I was being treated like something difficult to handle. Please stop talking about that. It's okay. She can't hear us anyway. Though I couldn't hear, I was able to understand most of what was being said. Why do you look so angry? It's really infuriating. Why did such a defective thing have to come to us? My mother sighed heavily. At that moment, I felt clear anger towards my mother for the first time. How much time had passed since then? When I realized it, it seems I had fallen asleep. When I woke up, an unfamiliar forest stretched outside the window. Look, we'll be arriving soon, so get ready. Okay, I understand. Is this the destination? What on earth were they planning? Following my father's instructions, my mother had me put on a small backpack. When did they prepare it? When I secretly checked inside, I found my change of clothes stuffed haphazardly among other items. Do you understand? Of course. My mother spoke to me with an unusually bright expression. Come on, Cheryl, get out. I quickly asked my mother, where is this place? It's a really fun place. You can also meet Grandma. Grandma. Grandma as in grandma? Yes. I had only met my mother's mother, my grandmother, a few times when I was young, but she was very kind to me even though I was deaf. I immediately loved her. But something felt off. I had heard that Grandma had passed away recently. I slowly opened the door and stepped outside. Surrounding me were trees much larger than myself. The moment I thought it was beautiful and stepped forward, I heard the sound of the car starting to move. What? My mother had a devilish grin and said just one thing. Take care then. Meanwhile, my father didn't even glance at me. I hurried towards the car. Hey, get away, you're in the way. I couldn't hear, but I could feel that my father was shouting. We don't need a useless child like you. So, from now on, this is your home. If you understand, could you please go somewhere else quickly? We're leaving. I understand. But thinking this is our last farewell makes me a bit sad. It would be troublesome if someone came. Just a little longer. I could only stand there. My father seemed to want to leave this place quickly and looked displeased. That's enough. With those words, my father got out of the car and walked towards me. I'm sorry, but this is for your own good. Saying so, he picked me up and carried me deeper into the forest. It felt as if he was disposing of trash. I was slammed face first into the ground. When I raised my head, the eyes looking down at me were no longer those of my father. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find the words. I had never hated myself so much. Wait. All I could do was watch the car as it drove away. The trees that had looked beautiful just before now seemed terrifying. Even though it was still daytime, the surroundings were dim. My head was filled with confusion from the sadness of being abandoned by my parents and the anxiety of not knowing where I was. It was early summer, when I was 12 years old. I didn't want to think about anything anymore. Maybe I could meet Grandma if I just stayed here. Maybe what my mother said meant, in the end, that I should die here. That's when I realized I had my smartphone. Maybe I could use it to call for help. However, when I checked my smartphone, it displayed out of service. Determined to find a signal, I decided to head towards an area where I could receive one. While retracing the path we came on, I walked for about 2 hours before making a call. Even when trying to contact the police, I, unable to speak, could not effectively communicate my situation. There was only one person I could rely on, my grandfather. "Hello. Cheryl, is that you?" "Yes, it's me. Where are you now?" I might be in the mountains." Just then, I heard the sound of birds nearby. "Is there anything notable near you?" "I can see a very tall tower." Then, I got it. "I'll head there right away." I don't know how my grandfather figured out where I was, but I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. 30 minutes later, my grandfather appeared. "Cheryl." I immediately jumped into my grandfather's arms. I never thought something like this would happen. I couldn't stop crying. They were tears of relief. "Don't worry, the best is yet to come." While saying this, my grandfather gently stroked my head. However, his face had an expression as if he was plotting something. After 15 years, my parents visited the office I had become the president of. I had grown under my grandfather's guidance and made it this far. "Cheryl, do you remember me? I'm your mother. I never imagined you would turn out so well." Seeing my parents in front of me, I caught a glimpse of their current lives. Their clothes were shabby and their hair was disheveled. It seems their situation was quite dire. Perhaps they thought I would help them? Of course, I had no intention of assisting them. "My name is Cheryl. I was born with a hearing disability. Later, I would find out that my mother had considered me a nuisance since I was a baby. Why can't this child just follow instructions? Hey, don't say such impossible things. She can't hear. Even so, if you keep coddling her, she'll be troubled as an adult, won't she? At this rate, she'll become a person who can't do anything." The reason I, who am deaf, could understand my parents' conversation was because I was recommended an app that converts speech to text by a hospital doctor. However, as a child, I could not understand everything. Nevertheless, there were quite a few instances of verbal abuse, taking advantage of my inability to hear. I always carried a tablet and gradually understood that such words were unacceptable by looking at it repeatedly. When I turned 5 years old, I met certain people. They were my grandparents, and even as a child, I could sense that their relationship with my mother was not good. "Welcome, Cheryl. I'm glad you came. Come on in." My grandparents welcomed me very warmly. My grandfather had retired early and spent his days leisurely with my grandmother. As my mother had said before, he was quite a capable person in his youth. Even though I couldn't speak out loud, it was no problem for them, unlike with my parents. I could communicate using a conversation app, and I didn't feel particularly inconvenienced. I must have fallen asleep while playing because I was completely exhausted. When I woke up, I saw my grandparents and mother having a fierce argument about something. In situations like this, I quietly picked up a nearby tablet and turned it on. "Why didn't you bring her here sooner? You could have at least let us know when the child was born." I quickly understood that the discussion was focused on me. We weren't expecting the child to be born with a hearing disability. Calm down. You must have had your doubts too. Why should I be the only one blamed? I never said such a thing. At that moment, my grandfather stood up and said something forcefully. I tried to look at the tablet, but the screen wouldn't respond. Perhaps the battery had died. However, it was clear from my grandfather's angry expression what his emotions were. Afterwards, my mother, with an angry expression, came towards me. She took my hand and led me out of the house. The expressions on my grandparents' faces at that moment will not fade from my memory for a while. After that incident, my parents' treatment of me became even stricter. I really can't understand what this child is thinking. She's very strange. It would have been easier if she could talk. Don't say that. It can't be helped that she can't hear. You're right. They might have forgotten, but I had the tablet as my ally. Even when I was being scolded, with this, I could pretend not to hear and ignore what was being said. The change since I started elementary school was incomparable to before. Get ready quickly. We are busy too. Today I was to start attending a school for the deaf. My mother was a housewife and came with me to school. She looked reluctant, but for me, who felt uneasy alone, her presence was very reassuring. This child really operates at her own pace. She must be nervous. It's good that the school is nearby. If she were to go out alone and get involved in something strange, it would be terrible. Well, yes. Thus, my mother led me by the hand to school. Upon arriving at school, my mother said this: "Listen, you'll be on your own from here on, but try not to cause any trouble." "Okay. I'll come to pick you up after school. Goodbye." After parting from my mother, I passed through the school gates. I had never met anyone else with the same hearing disability as me. With both anxiety and anticipation, I stepped into the classroom. And the day flew by in an instant. How was school today? It was really fun. That's good to hear. I want to learn sign language. My mother suddenly stopped walking and looked at me seriously. Sign language. Well, if you want to start, go ahead. My parents had never taught me sign language, though they knew it. About half of the children in my class were already conversing in sign language, and I felt left out. The app had been helpful up to now, but it had its limits in the school environment. From then on, every day for me was a struggle. I tried to apply what I learned at school at home as well. What are you doing? What's wrong? You're using your hands for something. Oh, Cheryl is practicing sign language. Oh, I think she mentioned something like that. I find it a bit bothersome, so I won't do it. My mother showed no interest, but my father had a different reaction. What does that mean? This represents my name. Oh, really? How do you sign Dad's name? I showed my father the sign language example for his name. Oh, thank you. With those words, my father gently stroked my head. I can't remember the last time I experienced such a heartwarming touch. From that moment, my father became interested in sign language, and my skills improved rapidly as we practiced together. Thanks to this new skill, communication with my classmates became smoother, and going to school became a daily joy. I felt that my relationship with my father had improved from before. One evening, I could tell that my parents were talking in the living room. Recently, don't you think we've been spoiling Cheryl a bit? That's not true. If anything, you've been cold to her. What? You're saying it's my fault? You haven't been interested until now either. Cheryl is still young, but she's trying hard and working hard every day. Maybe we could be a bit kinder. I can't hear, but I could sense that they were having a heated discussion. I didn't want my parents to have a rift because of me. After that, I tried to learn sign language on my own. My father looked a bit sad, but if this could improve our relationship even a little, I decided that it was okay. Just as I was thinking about it, my father began to secretly communicate with me using sign language without my mother noticing. Since sign language didn't require speaking, the risk of being discovered was lower. If Dad says it's okay, then maybe it's no problem. At home, I usually tried to be quiet to not anger my mother, but I gradually started to feel more confident through the time I spent with my father. However, it seemed that my mother did not approve of this change. Listen carefully. I don't know what you are doing with your father, but you better not get carried away. From that moment, my mother's surveillance of me became even stricter. My mother never hugged me. I could feel when my mother was talking to me, but I couldn't understand and react, which often left my expression frozen. Desperate to be embraced, I earnestly reached out my hands, but I was coldly rejected. Why? My mother left my side without hiding her disgust. In such situations, it was inevitable to get hurt. What's going on all of a sudden? There's a friend's wedding tomorrow, so I want to leave Cheryl with you. You come all of a sudden and say that. Couldn't you have contacted us beforehand? Even to my grandfather's questions, my mother did not answer. Please take care of her. Well, all right. We'll come and pick her up tomorrow night. My parents said that and left. You don't have to hold back here. Just as your grandmother says, you can do whatever you like. Taking advantage of my grandparents' kindness, my mother continued to leave me with them regularly. Reunions with my grandparents always brought me joy. However, as my suspicions about my mother increased, my relationship with her worsened. During this time, a significant event occurred. My mother caught my father and me communicating in sign language. So it was true. As I warned you before, don't do anything unnecessary, okay? Angry, my mother grabbed my neck and squeezed it. I couldn't breathe and couldn't resist. At that moment, my father grabbed my mother's arm and pulled it away from my neck. What are you doing? My father pulling away my mother's hand allowed me to escape unharmed. At this time, I was in the 5th grade of elementary school, learning lip reading. It's a technique to read what someone is saying by watching their lip movements. I can't stand it anymore. From now on, I forbid you to talk to Cheryl. That's going too far. Not a problem at all, my mother said with a laugh. You can't resist because when you left Cheryl at her grandparents' house, you were lying too. What did she mean by lying? That was because you were being forceful. But it's true that you were hiding the real reason. So you're an accomplice too. I could tell everything. That is. Slowly, the whole truth became clear. The reasons given for leaving me at my grandparents' house, like weddings or work, they were all lies. But now I can't think of any suitable reason to leave her there. If I could just leave Cheryl there, I wouldn't have to see her face. My mother sighed heavily, and it felt the heaviest ever. Hey, Cheryl is here too. It doesn't matter because she can't hear. From now on, you'll just have to listen to what I say. My father couldn't argue. Having overheard such conversations, I wasn't surprised when my father began avoiding me as before. However, it inflicted a deeper wound on my heart. By the time I was in the 6th grade, we could hardly be called a family anymore. I no longer went to my grandparents' house, let alone contacted them. One evening, I handed a school notice to my parents. What's this? Huh. It's for classroom visitation. So they want us to attend, huh? Well, I'll think about it. A week later, today, I went to school alone again. Months ago, my mother had ordered me to go to school by myself. At that time, I had no right to refuse. As I left the house, I whispered to myself, I'm going. The classroom visitation started in the afternoon, and one by one, my friends' parents entered the classroom. Will they come? I faced the class with just a little hope, but ultimately, my parents didn't show up. The school bell rang for dismissal, and just as I was about to leave the school gates to go home, it happened. Suddenly, someone tapped my shoulder, and when I turned around, there were my grandparents, who shouldn't have been there. I instinctively started speaking to them in sign language. But Grandpa, Grandma, you don't understand it, do you? However, in the next moment, something unbelievable happened. My grandparents responded in sign language. Why are you here? We were worried about you, Cheryl. But how did you know this place? We looked up schools near your home. I hadn't expected them to go to such lengths. Tears of joy spilled over. You're safe now. I never knew a hug could feel so warm. Actually, we came today because there's something we want to give you. Something you want to give me. Saying that, they handed me a smartphone. This is a secret just between us and Cheryl. Contact us immediately if you're in trouble. We will always come to get you. I had already forgotten that my parents hadn't come to the classroom visitation. At that time, I couldn't have imagined that this smartphone would eventually become a tool to save me from difficulties. I swore to myself to keep the smartphone entrusted by my grandparents a secret so that it would never be discovered. When I arrived home, my mother greeted me. I'm sorry, Cheryl. I was a bit busy and couldn't make it. I already understood the reason she hadn't come. Just as I was about to pass by my mother and head to my room, suddenly she grabbed my arm. Hem. My mother stared intently at my surprised face. Could she have found the smartphone? But it should be hidden in my backpack. I wonder who Cheryl takes after. To think such a child would be born to a couple of beauties. If it had been the me from before, these words would have immediately brought me down. But now I was different. Even if they were far away, there are people who truly cared about me. Holding that thought, about 2 weeks after the reunion with my grandparents, something happened. Can you tell me that story again? So, you're saying Mom died. Why did that happen? According to Dad, she was involved in a traffic accident. You're her daughter. Why are you so calm? I wonder why. At that moment, my thoughts completely stopped. My grandmother, whom I loved dearly. The shock that followed was even greater. So, what about the funeral? My mother started laughing. Of course I'm not going. Why not? She always complained, and I got tired of it. If you really want to go, go by yourself. My father couldn't say anything more. In the end, we didn't attend the funeral, and time just passed. A huge hole remained in my heart. I tried contacting my grandfather, but all he said was, "Don't worry." The impact of my grandmother's death on my grandfather must have been immeasurable. Another week passed. Are you ready? Wait, I'll be done in a bit. My parents were having such a conversation in the living room. Good morning, Cheryl. I nodded. Usually, conversations with my parents were conducted using a speech recognition app on a smartphone. This was because it was the most effective method. By the way, I kept it a secret from my family that I could read lips. Today we are going out somewhere as a family. Cheryl, hurry up and get changed. Got it. I was thrilled. Normally, I hardly ever go out except for school. To avoid dangers, I was not allowed to go out alone. After getting dressed, I asked my mother, "Where are we going?" "That's a surprise for when we get there." While getting into the car, I became even more excited. I wonder when was the last time I felt this excited. 30 minutes later, I noticed an unbelievable conversation between my parents. She's so creepy. Hey, that's terrible. She's our child, you know? Instead, I used a translation app to understand their conversation. The problem is, it's hard to guess what she's thinking. Well, she can't hear, so it can't be helped. My mother looked back at me. She's probably thinking we're taking her to a fun place. Hearing that conversation, my heart started to pound thinking about where we were going, but it wasn't in a positive way. My heart was filled with anxiety, and everything around me seemed blurry. Even before I could fully assert myself, I had felt cold stares from my parents. Even as a child, I felt like I was being treated like something difficult to handle. Please stop talking about that. It's okay. She can't hear us anyway. Though I couldn't hear, I was able to understand most of what was being said. Why do you look so angry? It's really infuriating. Why did such a defective thing have to come to us? My mother sighed heavily. At that moment, I felt clear anger towards my mother for the first time. How much time had passed since then? When I realized it, it seems I had fallen asleep. When I woke up, an unfamiliar forest stretched outside the window. Look, we'll be arriving soon, so get ready. Okay, I understand. Is this the destination? What on earth were they planning? Following my father's instructions, my mother had me put on a small backpack. When did they prepare it? When I secretly checked inside, I found my change of clothes stuffed haphazardly among other items. Do you understand? Of course. My mother spoke to me with an unusually bright expression. Come on, Cheryl, get out. I quickly asked my mother, where is this place? It's a really fun place. You can also meet Grandma. Grandma? Grandma as in grandma? Yes. I had only met my mother's mother, my grandmother, a few times when I was young, but she was very kind to me, even though I was deaf. I immediately loved her. But something felt strange. I had heard that Grandma had recently passed away. I slowly opened the door and stepped outside. Surrounding me were trees much taller than myself. The moment I thought it was beautiful and stepped forward, I heard the sound of the car starting to move. What? My mother had a devilish grin and said just one thing. Take care then. Meanwhile, my father didn't even glance at me. I hurried towards the car. Hey, get away, you're in the way. I couldn't hear, but I could feel that he was shouting. We don't need a useless child like you. So from now on, this is your home. If you understand, could you please go somewhere else quickly? We're leaving. I understand. But thinking this is our last farewell makes me a bit sad. It would be troublesome if someone came. Just a little longer. I could only stand there. My father seemed to want to leave this place quickly and looked displeased. That's enough. With those words, my father got out of the car and walked towards me. I'm sorry, but this is for your own good. Saying so, he picked me up and carried me deeper into the forest. It felt as if he was disposing of trash. I was slammed face first into the ground. When I raised my head, the eyes looking down at me were no longer those of my father. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find the words. I had never hated myself so much. Wait. All I could do was watch the car as it drove away. The trees that had looked beautiful just before now seemed terrifying. Even though it was still daytime, the surroundings were dim. My head was filled with confusion from the sadness of being abandoned by my parents and the anxiety of not knowing where I was. It was early summer when I was 12 years old. I didn't want to think about anything anymore. Maybe I could meet Grandma if I just stayed here. Maybe what my mother said meant, in the end, that I should die here. That's when I realized. I had my smartphone. Maybe I could use it to call for help. However, when I checked my smartphone, it displayed out of service. Determined to find a signal, I decided to head towards an area where I could receive one. While retracing the path we came on, I walked for about 2 hours before making a call. Even when trying to contact the police, I, unable to speak, could not effectively communicate my situation. There was only one person I could rely on, my grandfather. Hello, Cheryl, is that you? Yes, it's me. Where are you now? I might be in the mountains. Just then, I heard the sound of birds nearby. Is there anything notable near you? I can see a very tall tower. Then, understood. I'll head there right away. I don't know how my grandfather knew where I was, but I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. 30 minutes later, my grandfather appeared. Cheryl. I immediately jumped into my grandfather's arms. I never thought something like this would happen. I couldn't stop crying. They were tears of relief. Don't worry, the best is yet to come. While saying this, my grandfather gently stroked my head. However, his face had an expression as if he was plotting something. At that moment, I asked a question. How did you know where I was? Oh, I heard the sound of birds. It was a bird I often hear in the mountains nearby. Just from that. And there was that tall iron tower. It's well known around here. Well, half of it was also luck. That was why I was safe. After that, my grandfather's expression turned serious. Cheryl, do you want to go back to that house? I don't want to go back. I see. Then you can stay with me. Is that okay? No problem at all. After all, you are my beloved granddaughter. Upon that, my grandfather contacted my parents. According to him, my parents did not object at all. I felt and knew how trivial my existence was to them. At that moment, a strong desire to prove myself to my parents surged within me. My grandfather understood my feelings and passed on his knowledge and experiences to me. From now on, you'll do everything yourself. Yes. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to hear stories of my grandfather's youth. It seems that when he was young, he played a crucial role in supporting a friend's company. From these experiences, my grandfather was able to teach me profound business knowledge. It's about time. Yes, I understand. Time really flies. I was still in elementary school back then. But I've come this far thanks to you, Grandpa. At the age of 25, I started my own company. 2 years later, on a day that marked 15 years since my parents had abandoned me, they appeared. That day, I was in my office. The door opened, and a familiar face appeared. Cheryl. Do you remember me? I'm your mother? I never imagined you would turn out so well. Seeing my parents in front of me, I caught a glimpse of their current lives. Their clothes were shabby and their hair was disheveled. It seems their situation was quite dire. Perhaps they thought I would help them. Of course, I had no intention of assisting them. I tried to communicate my situation using sign language. We are family. Don't be so cold. What is Cheryl saying? I had completely forgotten, but my mother didn't understand sign language. So my words were not understood by her. I'm saying I have no obligation to help you. Who do you think raised you to this point? At the very least, it wasn't my mother. So I revealed the truth. Didn't Grandpa tell you? I was adopted. Adopted. Did you know about this? No, maybe it was mentioned at some point. My father held his head in his hands. We have no one else but you, right? That's right. When parents are in trouble, it's normal to help, isn't it? Can you leave? You're in the way. What kind of attitude is that towards your parents? You're not my parents anymore. At that moment, my secretary entered the office. Madam President, it's almost time for your meeting. That's right. I had a meeting coming up. I gave instructions to my secretary on the spot. Please escort these outsiders out. Understood. Immediately, security appeared, and the two were escorted out of the room. You'll regret this. I should have never given birth to you. Those were the last words I heard from my mother. After that statement, I began investigating my parents. I wanted to know why they had fallen so far. The truth quickly became clear. It seems they have quite a lot of debt, truly beyond saving. And it looks like they've been wandering from place to place without any plan for repayment. But how did they know to come here? Most likely because of this. I showed a business magazine as I said that. On the cover of the magazine was a picture of me. I now run a company that supports children with the same disabilities I have. It's to ensure that no child ever goes through what I did. Still, it's surprising they recognized me from this. Even those people had some parental instincts, I suppose. So what shall we do next? For now, continue the investigation. I want to know how things develop. The next report came in about a month later. It seems, as their lives became more difficult, they resorted to fraud and were promptly arrested. Well, I wasn't surprised it came to that, and honestly, I didn't care. Their real suffering was just beginning. I guess it was time to pay someone a visit. That day, I went to visit a grave. This grave wasn't just for my grandmother. I'll keep doing my best, so please watch over me from heaven, Grandpa, Grandma. Today, I keep walking forward, because I believe that's the fastest path to success. I'm thinking of building a house so we can live together with my parents. What? Where will we get the money to build a house? What? We can just use our savings. One day, my husband brought up the idea of multi-generational living, and I was at a loss for words. It seemed he looked down on me for this reason. As I was shocked, my husband continued, "If you can't follow what I say, the only option is divorce." All right, then, let's get divorced. I couldn't stand his selfishness anymore. But I wasn't planning on divorcing easily. I intended to make him fully atone. With that in mind, I accepted the divorce as he wished. It was you who orchestrated this, wasn't it? What are you talking about? Isn't it just desserts? He would come to regret his past actions. And he was destined to lose everything. I am Hillary, and I work from home. I met my husband, Chris, at the company I used to work for. Strictly speaking, he was introduced by my boss. My boss was my upperclassman from my university days, and I had been close to him since my student days. Got any plans after work? Not really. There's someone I want you to meet. Me. It was sudden, and honestly, it was annoying. I really wanted to watch the drama I had recorded at home. However, I couldn't just easily refuse after being approached by my boss. He's an interesting guy. Just for a little while. I wasn't expecting anything, but once we started talking, I found that Chris and I had similar hobbies. Moreover, I felt comfortable and at ease being myself around him. The progress from there was surprisingly smooth. Marry me. Ah, a proposal. Yes, but I'm surprised it's so sudden. I want you to marry me. Chris proposed to me just 3 months into our relationship. I was so surprised that I gave a strange reply, but of course my answer was yes. After we get married, I'd like you to quit your job and stay at home. Is that okay? Sure. I decided to prioritize Chris's feelings. Chris strongly wanted me to be a homemaker, but I wanted to avoid losing my income. So I asked my company to let me work from home. You look pale. I didn't think being a housewife would be so hard. What happened? I thought it would be easy just doing housework. Hearing this, Chris laughed and said, "Just go at your pace, Hillary. I'll help out where I can." That sounds good. Thank you. Chris's words were reassuring. I'm not good at housework, and it took more effort than I thought. Yet Chris never complained and just watched over me. I felt that marrying him was not a mistake. However, not everything went smoothly. I did poorly again this time. That's too bad. But you can just try harder next time. I tried to encourage him, but Chris's face changed and he raised his voice. Don't say it so easily. I almost retorted that he was just venting, but I managed to hold back. Chris works in sales, and it seems his results weren't going as well as expected. I had no idea that such a situation would follow. I'm sorry. I was trying to cheer you up because you seemed down. I also spoke too harshly. I'm sorry. He apologized, but irritation was evident on his face. In such situations, I struggle to choose the right words, and appropriate expressions don't come to mind. Moreover, I feared that saying anything might anger my husband again. A little while later. How's work? I took the day off because I wasn't feeling well. Are you okay? He seemed energetic despite saying he was feeling unwell. He had an appetite and even had a second helping of rice at breakfast. I found it strange, but I didn't think too deeply about it at that time. From that day on, whenever I said something to Chris, he took it as a complaint and started blaming me. How are you feeling? Better now. I'm going out for a walk to change my mood. Shouldn't you rest a bit more at home? I'm fine. I'm just going for a walk nearby. Really? You shouldn't push yourself too hard. Suddenly, Chris glared at me. By the time I realized it was a bad idea to say that, it was already too late. What's wrong with you? You're always nagging. I was just worried. I'm telling you I'm fine. Instead of worrying about me, why don't you do some housework? Understood. I was left speechless by Chris's words. The Chris I knew since our marriage had become someone I no longer recognized. Days like these went on for years. I spent every day wondering how I could get through the day without making Chris angry. I'll be home late today. What about dinner? I'll eat at home. With that, I waited for my husband to come home. It was past 11 p.m., but he still hadn't returned. I'm home. It was almost midnight. Relieved that he had returned safely, I smiled and headed to the entrance. Welcome back. Are you going to eat dinner? I already ate out. Really? Why? I heard you say this morning that you'd eat at home. Did I say that? Well, never mind. I stood frozen in place. I had prepared dinner for two and hadn't touched my food while waiting. Facing Chris, who didn't even apologize, I began to harbor doubts. Does he really love me? During these continuing days, something happened one day. This is for you, Hillary. Chris gave me a bouquet of flowers. Knowing I liked red roses, the bouquet was filled with them. For me? Why? Hey, did you forget your own birthday? What? Recently, so many things had piled up that I hadn't realized it was my birthday. I also bought cake and wine on the way back. Let's celebrate together. Thank you. I was truly happy that he celebrated my birthday like this, something I hadn't expected. I could feel Chris's love clearly. We spent some peaceful time together for the first time in a while, savoring the happiness. I wish these days could continue. Can I talk to you? I have a concern about next month's payment. What? The time I felt happy was quickly over. Although the living expenses he had been giving were sufficient until now, they had clearly decreased compared to before. I had been managing somehow, but this time it seemed impossible. I had savings, but they were for the future, and I hadn't intended to use them now. It seems like the usual amount won't be enough for next month. Not enough. Aren't you just buying unnecessary things, Hillary? I'm only buying the essentials. I'm saving wherever I can. So, you're saying you're saving and buying stuff for yourself, right? If it were the old me, I might have given up arguing at this point, but not this time. Considering we wanted children and thinking about the future, I felt it was necessary to have a proper discussion. I'm telling you no. The amount you've given me has decreased, so I've been refraining from buying things for myself these past few months. Are you saying it's my fault? Why has the money decreased? What are you using it for? I decided to say everything I was thinking at this opportunity. However, perhaps irritated by my resistance, Chris threw the smartphone he was holding at me. I instinctively protected my face with my hands. Fortunately, my face was okay, but the smartphone screen was completely shattered. If you have complaints, earn it yourself. I'm asking you because it's impossible. The worsening of this problem was due to Chris's low salary. Chris worked in sales, where incentives were significant, and his salary increased based on the number of contracts. However, if he didn't secure contracts, his salary wouldn't increase at all. That's when I decided to make a bold proposal. Then, is it okay if I go out to work? However, he did not agree with that proposal. What are you talking about? Didn't we agree that you would stay home after we got married? That's true, but your salary alone isn't enough. That might be true, but I won't allow you to go out to work. Isn't it harder to balance housework and a job? Would it be okay if I could work from home? Feeling that the situation wouldn't change unless we resolved this issue, I continued the conversation, believing that it would ultimately lead to a better outcome for both of us. However, Chris said something unexpected. It's strange that you're so eager to work. Why do you think that? I'm purely saying this for our livelihood. Worried that the conversation was heading in a wrong direction, I tried to steer it back, but it seemed my words weren't reaching him. Is there another man? The moment I heard these words, I felt our trust toward each other fading away. After all this time of enduring while being mindful of Chris's mood, if you're going to say that, then fine. I won't go out to work. Are you satisfied now? You should have said that from the beginning. At this point, my love for Chris had almost faded. He would explode in anger if things didn't go his way. This situation was even worse than dealing with a domineering husband. And then, a certain event led me to vow revenge. Chris, you will have to pay the shortfall. I can't work. All right. And Hilary, you should show more respect for me. Chris strongly wanted me to stay home for a reason. Apparently, he wanted to feel like he was supporting the family. However, he didn't realize that his status as the main breadwinner was also unstable. I really appreciate that you're working hard. Are you mocking me because my salary is low? Not at all. I live off the money you earn. If you understand that, then it's fine. But watch your mouth. The words I told Chris were sincere. But there's nothing more foolish than being forced to deal with such meaningless pride. That's why I think his work isn't going well. And then, I was further cornered by a new presence. Chris was saying recently that you're acting high and mighty. What? When called to his parents' house, I was immediately greeted with such words. If Chris hadn't talked about it, this situation wouldn't have occurred. Moreover, since he is their only son, he is very much loved by them. Therefore, they always fully support him. You should understand more that Chris is the main breadwinner. Yes. I responded non-committally while tuning them out. Then, my attitude angered them. What's with that attitude? Listen seriously to what we're saying. Your mother should teach you how to respect your husband more, shouldn't she? Really? If you say so, maybe I should do so. As they said this, it became harder to just brush them off. I felt that continuing to interact with these two would destroy my life. I thought they were kind people before we got married, but that was only because the problems had not surfaced. The fire was lit because Chris had consulted them. I apologize for interrupting, but I have another appointment, so I must leave now. This was the only way I could think of to get away from there. What's this next appointment? A housewife like you shouldn't have any appointments. His parents smirked ominously. I really do have an appointment today, so I apologize, but I must go home. With that said, I left my in-laws' house a bit forcefully. On the way home, my heart was pounding nonstop, unsettled. It was the first time I had felt such emotions. But this did not mean everything was over. Are you back? When I opened the door, there was Chris. I'm home. What are you doing? You went to my parents' place, right? Why do you know? My mother called and said you left without listening to them. I thought it was a bad situation. I knew they would talk to Chris, but at that moment I couldn't think of anything. I did listen to them. Then why did you leave in the middle of the conversation? I had an appointment. I thought it was a bit of a stretch, but Chris seemed to believe it, or at least he didn't press any further. Relieved, I stared at the ceiling. After that, Chris's intimidating attitude softened a bit, and we were able to spend some peaceful days. I feel a bit feverish, so I'm going to take a day off from work. Did you take your temperature? I just checked, and it was around 38 degrees. Are you okay? You should take some medicine. Maybe I will. Even though he had been working diligently without taking days off recently, I was concerned that the days he didn't go to work were increasing. That day, after finishing the household chores, I went to check on Chris. It was just when I was about to throw away the garbage. I thought, isn't this the medicine I gave to Chris? Chris pretended to take the medicine but actually threw it in the trash. Seeing this, I intuitively thought that his fever was a lie. Furthermore, I remembered something. He would say he was sick and skip work, but then he would go out saying he was going for a walk. At that point, I decided to try a little strategy on Chris. I'm going out to do some shopping. I might take a little longer because I want to stop by a new store. Okay, take care. His reply didn't sound like one from someone who was feeling unwell at all. It was full of energy. I pretended to go out and ambushed him from a spot where I could see the entrance. Sure enough, Chris soon appeared. I thought, where is he going? I wonder. I followed him discreetly and confirmed that he entered a casino. I immediately took out my smartphone and took photos. I realized that this was the reason he had been skipping work and going out. If he was addicted to gambling, it made sense that the monthly living expenses he provided had decreased. Then, one Saturday, Chris said something unbelievable. It was the start of an incident. I'm thinking of building a house so we can live together with my parents. What? Where will we get the money to build a house? What? We can just use our savings. I was lost for words. Was this why he had been looking down on me? As I was shocked, my husband continued, I'm the head of this household. You can't go against what I say. So, what is this man thinking? The fact that he says such things as if they were natural shows he deserves no respect. If you can't follow what I say, the only option is divorce. All right, then, let's get divorced. I could no longer endure his selfishness. But I wasn't planning on divorcing easily. I intended to make him fully atone. All right, my parents will be arriving soon though. Now, both of them are coming. We'll live together here until we build the house. Make sure to entertain them well when they arrive. Saying this, Chris started preparing to go out somewhere. I was appalled at how self-centered he could be, not staying home even though his parents were coming, but I decided to use this opportunity. I actually wanted to leave this house as soon as possible, but I thought I would announce the divorce in front of his parents. I'll make sure to entertain them well. As I saw my husband off, I couldn't help but smile. Then, I waited for his parents to arrive. Oh, where did Chris go? I heard my mother-in-law's voice from the entrance. He went out. He entrusted me to take good care of you two. I wanted to see him. Well then, please take care of our luggage. Luggage? As told, I began to carry all the luggage into the room. During this, a doubt crossed my mind. Why did we start living together in this house before building a new one? Their house is bigger and more convenient for them, so why insist on living together in this house? How long will you keep carrying luggage? I'm worried about our future life with such a slowpoke. After I finished carrying the luggage, just as I was thinking to take a rest, they called me. Bring this, go buy that, as if they were treating me like a maid. I felt it was about time, and so I told them about the divorce. I'm going to divorce Chris and leave this house. Hillary, what's gotten into you all of a sudden? What are you saying? Who will take care of this house then? It's already decided, so please do as you wish. I hurriedly organized my belongings and prepared to leave the house. Confusion was clearly visible on their faces. You can't just do whatever you want like this. That's right. Don't blame Chris if he gets angry. There's nothing to forgive. Chris told me that divorce was the only option. I'm just following that. You have a lot of nerve saying that. They spoke to me in a harsh tone, but I felt no fear. It might be none of my business, but I think it will be difficult for Chris to support your lifestyle. What do you mean all of a sudden? Please ask him for the details. His parents seemed to be shouting something, but I left without caring. I considered going back to my parents' home, but it seemed like it would take some time, so I booked a nearby hotel instead. Then I decided to make a call to someone immediately. I'm sorry to bother you on your day off. I have something I need to discuss. Do you have some time? It's been a while. How are you? What happened? It's about Chris. I told my boss everything about Chris's fake illnesses. I see. Thanks for telling me. Did you know about this? I had been a bit concerned too. According to my boss, Chris had been acting strangely at work as well. When I thought about his behavior, that made sense. I also have proof photos of Chris playing slots on the days he took off from work due to illness. I'll give them to you. Thanks. But are you okay? I'm fine. I can't stay with him any longer, so I'm getting a divorce. I see. If this gets out, he probably won't be able to stay at the company either. I left the matter to my boss and decided to enjoy some time to myself for the first time in a while. As Chris called me repeatedly, I turned off my phone. Since it was Saturday, my husband would be shocked when he goes to work on Monday. I'm a little sorry that I won't be able to see Chris's face. Then, the awaited Monday arrived. It was you who set this up, wasn't it? When I turned on my phone, there were over 100 missed calls from Chris, so I answered the phone with some anticipation. He seemed to be panicking. What are you talking about? Isn't it your own doing? I responded to Chris calmly. Then he became even angrier. This was the reaction I expected. When I got to work, I was called in and given a termination notice. No one else could have done this but you. I took a deep breath. Even if I hadn't acted, he would have been fired eventually. I had just moved things along a little sooner. Didn't the company find out what you had been doing? Why? When did it get out? Chris seemed a bit disheveled. It doesn't concern me anymore. What? If I get fired, you won't be able to live either. Chris seemed to have forgotten what he had said. I wonder if they hadn't told him. We're getting a divorce, so it doesn't matter, does it? Hearing this, Chris fell silent. Perhaps he had been confident that I wouldn't actually go through with the divorce. If so, he was truly a foolish person. I was completely dumbfounded. Did you take me seriously? Of course I did. Who jokes about divorce? No, it was just a little joke, right? That's a harsh joke? Plus, there's no way I could live with your parents who are in debt. What? Debt? What are you talking about? It seemed they hadn't told Chris anything. I used this holiday to investigate their home. I had been curious about the reason for the cohabitation. Fortunately, their home was just a 15-minute train ride away, so I went there myself. They had moved in with us because they had actually lost their place to live. I'm sorry, but I had your parents investigated. I heard a lot from the neighbors too. They've gotten into serious debt from gambling, and it's unbelievable that they even lost their house. It was an absurd story, but both of them were dependent on gambling. They spent money on casinos and accumulated debt, eventually using their home as collateral for a loan. In the end, they had to sell the house. We ended up living together because they lost their home. You're the same with your dependence on gambling, right? You were going to casino even on the days you took off from work, weren't you? Was it that obvious? It's not something I need to hide, and I have proof too. Damn it. Where were you hiding? There's no way I'm telling you that. Chris was emotional and unable to think clearly. I decided it was time to say everything I wanted to say. Tell me. You don't want to know what happens if you don't. More importantly, don't you have something you need to tell your parents? What do I need to tell them? About your salary. Can you tell them you only make $1,500 a month? Even though you're in sales, you can't secure any contracts. I felt good about saying that to myself. Yet, Chris had been gambling with that money. You're hiding the truth. I think it's wise to tell them sooner rather than later. Shut up. I was planning to tell them eventually. There's no need to be so stubborn. I laughed, looking down on Chris. It seems the situation has completely changed. This must be the payback for how he has underestimated me all this time. Don't get so high and mighty just because you're a housewife. You're the one who's going to suffer. I still have the luxury to care about others. I'll take that as a compliment. Why is this happening to me? I don't know. All right then, I'm hanging up. With that, I ended the call. Then I decided to go get the divorce papers. Divorce was just part of my revenge. A harsher reality awaits Chris and his family. and I successfully got divorced. As expected, Chris contacted me. "It's tough because I have debts. Help me out." After losing his job, he had apparently been borrowing money for living expenses. Despite his parents suffering from debts, he ended up in the same situation, which made him even more pitiful. Debts sound tough, but you just have to work hard to pay them off, right? Even though we're divorced, don't you feel a little bit like helping? Why would I? You're a stranger to me now that we're divorced. Getting all high and mighty just because we're divorced, huh? Do I need to be considerate towards a stranger? I said that and ended the call. Afterward, Chris decided to cut ties with his own parents. It seems his parents hadn't been told about Chris's income either. This caused a fight and led to them severing their relationship. It looks like a bleak future for them, and as for me, it really was tough, huh? I'm sorry for any trouble I caused you. If it's okay with you, could you come back to work? We've been looking for someone to join us in the office. Really? I would love to work again. Remote work was fine, but I wanted to show my face at the office and work there. That's great. Everyone will be delighted to have you back. Thus, I was able to start a new job and am living a fulfilling life. My savings were not taken by my ex-husband, and from now on I plan to spend my money and time for myself and enjoy life.